the presentation. So here are some of our initial stuff. This is the slide we've showed before. And here are a number of the questions that we have attended to, especially in Wave 1. How many youth actually engage in these activities? Do youth who tweet about politics vote? In other words, do some people choose to do one but not the other, and vice versa? How is engagement in participatory politics changing over time? Is there a digital divide? And is there a role for education? And since this is APSA, we're going to say less about the education side of things, though, of course, be happy to talk about that. So here we go. This is the stat that was in the other one, but hopefully easier to see. So 41% of young people 15 to 25 said they did at least one act of participatory politics. So on one level, you could say, well, 59% didn't. But that's also what we found when we looked at any other political act, it was 44%. So it's part of what we know. This is an off-year survey, right? This isn't. This was done in 2011. Most young people aren't. They don't get up in the morning and act politically. But to the extent that young people do, they're as likely to do these participatory acts as they are to do other things. And so our case was, if you don't pay attention to these, you're missing a huge dimension of what young people are doing. And in fact, as I'll show in a minute, the number of people doing participatory politics is growing while many of the other forms aren't. So it may well be that it becomes even more significant as an overall percentage of young people's political lives. Here's just another stat, just comparing things that, again, in 2017, when we found this in 2011, we were like, this is a finding. Now, like, people would be like, more people don't get their news from Twitter and Facebook? But back then, it was like, more people get people are as likely to get their news from these sources as they are from newspapers and magazines online and offline. And it doesn't mean that much of what gets tweeted about aren't things people initially read in a newspaper or magazine or on the news or something. Often it is. But it does mean that it's being mediated by their social network. It's not being determined by the editors of the newspaper. Here's just another way of taking a look at this. The percentage of people looking at TV or radio broadcasts online is still the most common way that people get news. But as you'll see, if you look at these other activities, those are also super common. This shows that very few people only engage in participatory politics. So while 41% of young people said they did one act of participatory politics, 37% of that 41% also did an act of institutional politics. So we have very few people who do neither. We do have a sizable number of people, though, who are disengaged from all kinds. And that strikes us as, in many ways, the more important thing is not that people are going to tweet but not vote, or vote but not tweet. It's that some people aren't going to do either. And so especially, from the education side, or folks that want to, create political change, that disengaged group is highly significant. And here are some trends. This just compares our items from 2011 and 2013, and you see, and the 2013 survey is asking, Ben, am I correct? That's asking pre-election.
Well, this is.
I mean. So there's 2012 data in it, is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, it's asking about, it's collected in 2013, so the question is asking about the 12 months prior.
And so there would be, it includes what people did coming up to the 2012 election. That's the better way of saying. And you see a big increase, so you might say, well, that's just because it's about the 2012 election. But if we take a look at offline campaign activities in our survey, you see there wasn't any significant change. And so we do think, again, this is hardly, amazing. People are doing more and more online activity. I know that isn't newsworthy statement at this point, but I think it is really important to identify the fact that this dimension of young people's political lives is growing dramatically at a time when other dimensions may not be. And that just is, again, more and more reason to pay attention to this dimension of activity. These are the protest numbers comparing 2011 and 2013. And again, these were offline campaign activities, and these were the participatory politics activities. And then here's a little bit on equity. So we just used, in this slide, mother's level of education as a kind of proxy for socioeconomic status. And what you see is remarkable flatness, we think, in terms of reports of engaging in participatory politics with kids with different levels of mother's education. And if you compare that to the likelihood of voting, you see dramatic inequality. So again, this speaks to at least the potential for participatory politics to help bring about some structures that would promote greater political equality in terms of voice. This one takes a look at household income. And Ben could explain in better detail than I how we estimated household income. But again, you see a pattern where only at the upper level, 100K plus, do you start seeing a difference at all in the relationship between income and activity when it comes to participatory politics. And even then, nowhere near as large a difference as you would see if you took a look at voting. Here's some stuff by race. So voting by race is significantly higher for African Americans, significantly lower for Asians and Latinos. But if you take a look at participatory politics by race, it's relatively flat. And it all depends, exactly what those lines look like, all depend on whether you're just looking at online participatory politics, because we would argue there are also forms of offline participatory politics that still have those same dynamics to them. And there you go. So let me pause there and ask any questions, thoughts, comments about all of that. Yes?
Yeah, your part of participation is coming on the general social system, right? So when I see the divide between those with not, or a range of education and uniform rates of participation in participatory politics, then the traditional ones where education really makes the difference, I'm wondering, how do you take into account changes in our institutions that are concurrent, like the Department of Homeland Security and monitoring activity online, which to my students has served as one method of oppression where they said, I'm hesitant to exercise voice.
Yeah.
I'm worried about this monitoring. So the political science seniors will say things like that. And some of these are the smartest, savviest students. So how do you take into account institutions, if at all? It's really a hard question.
It's a really hard question, but it's a really good question, and it gives me a moment to say, because we're not covering all the things that we can do here. In no way would we want to say that participatory politics is more good than bad, right? It's good and bad. It has multiple kinds, and the internet and those technologies are good and bad, right? There are all kinds of things that are happening. There's no way to, there is probably a real benefit because people can get information that didn't used to be accessible, and people get misinformation, right? People can see viewpoints, right? When I grew up, I never would have seen the equivalent of Al Jazeera's, but now I can, right? You can get all kinds of stuff that you never could have gotten before. But people are also going to, potentially quite problematic places that weren't as accessible before. So I think the question you ask about surveillance is super important. One of the research projects that was done looked at Muslim youth, and this was a qualitative project by Sangeeta Shrestova, where she did an in-depth sort of anthropological look at a group of Muslim youth in Southern California. and obviously these issues were paramount in their heads as they thought about their political activity. And so our survey, I don't think, Ben, do we have anything on there that speaks to surveillance?
Not to that, but I think more broadly, this is a good opportunity. There are items that were part of the Wave 2 survey that are not part of the data release today, but will be part of the future data release. I don't think we set a specific date, but we're anticipating in the year.
Just a couple months, yeah.
They're very much tied to Joe's research agenda. We have a lot of items on civic education, both traditional civic education as well as sort of what you might call digital media literacy. So there's a whole host of educational variables that will be included in the later releases of both the Wave 2. I think the questions are even a bit better in the Wave 3 survey. So I think these data going forward have a lot of potential to look into those sorts of questions.
This question would be great. Is that as you become educated, there's a bifurcation. Are you more likely or less likely online, right? So
Right.
if the track some of your findings online, more educated, go to a traditional way.
No, I think it's really helpful. I mean, one of the things your point is highlighting that we haven't touched on at all, but would love it if folks would. I mean, we now will have, for example, 15 to 29. So you can start taking a look at how do things change over time. We know from a set of case studies that was done by a group at Harvard that was part of the network that the kids they followed over time became less likely to share online about politics as they got older, which I think other folks are finding too. But looking at how that changes could be quite helpful. And because you could look at it both in terms of the panel and because we have the cross-sectional of kids going from 15 to 29, it might be possible to really get some understanding. And again, it's not clear whether that's good or bad. Right? It's not clear whether it would, if people decide to self-censor a little bit, maybe that makes for a better politics, but maybe in some cases it doesn't. And so we have to sort of wrestle with that, but you can take a look at the changes.